Decentralized, all the things. Decentralized, all the things.
What is up, dear listener? Welcome back to another edition of What the Fork. I am your host, Damo. Today, we are talking with Christopher David of Arcade City. It is basically a decentralized Uber. It's the only rideshare network owned and operated by its drivers. This is just one example of a decentralized service platform. We could do this for everything. We could do this for Airbnb, for instance. They have facilitated over 250,000 rides in their first market, which is Austin, Texas. Christopher is a pretty bold guy. He does not mince words. I enjoyed chatting with him immensely. We touched a lot of topics in a not that long conversation. We touched on trying to define decentralization, which is not easy. We also talk about anti-fragility. This is a property of systems that increase in capability, resilience, or robustness as a result of stressors. We talk a little about Metcalfe's law and how group-forming networks are more potent than walled gardens. And we also get into something that's really important to me, which is the idea that governance and left-leaning values are really needed in decentralized systems. We need our friends on the left to realize the transformative potential of voluntary, ground-up, innovative systems designed and implemented by communities themselves. There's an incredible opportunity here for libertarians and progressives to collaborate. We talk a lot about incremental versus exponential change. How do we do this without too much instability? We talk about siloed versus collaborative and interoperable efforts. We talk about building first and asking forgiveness later, which is something that Christopher and Arcade City have really pioneered. And we talk about diplomacy versus radicalism. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Okay, hey, I'm here with Christopher David, the founder and CEO of Arcade City, which is a really rad project working, currently at least, on essentially a decentralized version of Uber. Christopher, thanks for joining me, man.
Damo, thanks for having me.
So we were trying to figure out how to frame this conversation. What should we talk about? What can we share with you guys that opens the door onto the wonderful world of blockchain and decentralization? And we figured we would talk a little generally about decentralization and sort of the tension point of that as a value, as a principle, versus actually getting shit done and building communities that produce things of value.
Yeah, I say it's a spectrum, and I don't have this fully worked out, but like the most decentralized thing like doesn't even exist. It's so decentralized, like no one's doing anything at all.
Right.
At some point, some individual agent has to step forward and say, fuck it, here's what I'm gonna do. Like someone's got to start something. Now, we're so fortunate that we have the dude who started something in the context of Bitcoin, like created this amazing structure, handed it off and disappeared. We don't even know who he is. And thank God that he stays sort of in the shadows and doesn't touch his Bitcoins, because that would screw with the Bitcoin ecosystem were he to come back and do that. So that's
an existential threat to the whole system, not knowing who he is and knowing that he's sitting on a million of them.
One has to think, I'm of the opinion that were he to come forward and move some coins, the market would freak out but recover eventually. Bitcoin has proven its anti-fragility. And yes, it's absolutely a hope and an aspiration that other projects in the decentralization space aim to be as decentralized as Bitcoin is, and as anti-fragile as Bitcoin has proven itself to be. Just celebrated their 10-year anniversary. I like to think, just to kind of jump forward in Arcade City, that we have demonstrated anti-fragility ourselves. Our offices have been raided. I've been arrested. We've had national transportation regulatory authorities threaten to send 4 agencies against our drivers. Every single time we faced some threat that some corporate douchebag would interpret as existential, we've thrived and only grown stronger from every single time anything like that has happened. We're at a point now where we have built in our hometown, our adopted hometown of Austin, Texas, the world's first and only peer-to-peer ride-sharing network that is owned and operated by its drivers. Now, I put it in those terms because I want to draw a little bit of a distinction between an existing rideshare network that is actively providing reliable citywide transportation to a major U.S. market. Let's contrast that with the 20-plus projects that if you Google around and look for decentralized ride-sharing startups, so many websites with white papers and grand claims about what they're going to do to decentralize ride sharing. I would make the argument that Arcade City has done more actual rides than all of them combined and generated more media than all of the rest combined. But this is because we haven't been dogmatic about decentralization. Decentralization is a spectrum, and you might critics have and will continue to point to Arcade City and say, well, you're not totally decentralized.
Can you define decentralization for the audience?
Oh, gosh.
I know, right?
Let's start with the context of ride sharing. Our argument is that the relevant decentralization for ride sharing is that when a rider and driver connect, there is no corporate intermediary who is party to the transaction and who can limit the transaction. So a rider and driver should be able to connect completely peer-to-peer. The rider should be able to pay the driver directly and have the corporation take 0% because they're not any party or any way involved with the transaction. Arcade City has had 250,000 plus of those rides occur, primarily in Austin. And it's absolutely wonderful to see. To our knowledge, we are the only player active in the rideshare marketplace that can actually claim, hey, look, we have this level of ride volume occurring, and there is no corporate intermediary interjecting itself into what should be truly peer-to-peer transactions. And it's so funny how when people hear that, so many of them, even decentralized advocates, will be like, well, how do you make money and how do you exist and what are you doing? It's like,
right.
First of all, I want to say, don't worry about us. We'll be fine. Thank you for your concern. There are other ways of making money as a company that is sort of helping to facilitate a peer-to-peer services marketplace. And I can get into that in a bit, but it boils down to, look, you can help to facilitate a global marketplace of peer-to-peer ride-sharing connections all over the world. And there are some things that market is going to be okay and good at providing, like peer-to-peer ride matching and, a properly incentivized community of rideshare drivers is going to be able to kind of do its own quality control for drivers that are in their immediate network. It might not be so good at setting up the types of business relationships, for example, in the realm of credit card transactions. And they might want a company like Arcade City Inc. to say, hey, for people who want to attach a credit card to a mobile app and pay through the mobile app, which, like it or not, that's the consumer expectation these days. We are going to provide that for you, completely optional. If you do that, we're going to cover our costs plus a little bit extra to pay for our time. Use it or don't. We think that's a completely valid revenue model, a completely valid way to sustainably support and scale a decentralized services marketplace. We are not aware of anyone else doing that in the realm of rideshare. We call ourselves a decentralized ride-sharing startup, a decentralized ride-sharing marketplace. It's not yet 100% on the blockchain. And look, things are moving in that direction. Any true decentralization advocate, any true, group running a decentralized startup has to recognize that at some point, the principles under which you're organizing are going to put you out of business. And you need to be comfortable with that. I am comfortable with that. I think it's going to be a long time before humans are going to be removed from the equation and everything's running on algorithms and blockchains and stuff like that. I hail our future AI overlords. I am your friend. Don't attack me. We need, humans are needed, but there's a whole realm of how humans should organize in a decentralized environment that is, most importantly, not based on coercion, which is you have to do things our way or you'll be deactivated or banned or, in the case of government, imprisoned, it's completely voluntary. If you want to opt into our network and opt into our reputation systems and feel comfortable transacting under these conditions, you are welcome. If not, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So what's interesting to me is that the primary platform you guys have been using to organize your service or your network is just Facebook groups, right? Has it gone beyond that yet? Is there an app or is it still primarily just like Facebook groups?
We've released a number of versions of a mobile app. We do have a mobile app that is in the App Store. Our most recent version was released 2 weeks ago for both Android and iOS. That is available. The app is primarily aimed at organizers of these, what we're calling guilds, these driver cooperatives. This model that we've seen in our flagship Austin network is required for sustainable decentralized marketplaces to work in practice. Basically, the self-governing drivers cooperative is going to handle the types of things that ordinarily will be handled by a state or city corporate office by Uber, vetting drivers, dealing with customer complaints, that kinds of things. There's plenty of decentralized rideshare startups talking the talk about what they're doing, and they're like, oh, well, the token is going to do this and this and this. It's all completely theoretical. Yeah. Like no one actually gives a shit about your token, and like nobody's got there is room for. And the answer to how do you provide those types of services that consumers expect in a decentralized way is by decentralizing it away from the corporate headquarters and empowering entrepreneurs who are familiar with the local market, who are properly incentivized because they're making their own money and like they're running the show. They're actually acting as true entrepreneurs. So why the network thus far, even though we have released different versions of our mobile app, almost all of the actual rides that have been given through our flagship Austin network, which is the 98+% of the ride volume to date, it's been going through Facebook in part because that's where the riders are. Like everyone is on Facebook.
Right, network effect. It is what it is.
Yes. When we have studied sort of what makes the Austin network tick, what we recognize is that what we have is the very basics of what's called a group forming network. So this is like gets to some sort of relatively advanced network theory, but I want to share it because I think it's important in understanding where the sharing economy is going next. So Uber and Lyft are called by many peer-to-peer networks.
They're not.
Even though they're definitely not.
But they're really not even sharing economy.
Right, yes, and they've sort of co-opted that term and are incorrectly labeled. But, props to them for building massive billion-dollar companies and providing service that's valuable. Not that the taxi industry was that difficult to outmaneuver, but there's a network theory that kind of derived from telecommunications. Bob Metcalfe has this thing called Metcalfe's Law. This academic created this theory deriving from telecommunications that were basically the value of any given network is n squared. Any given peer-to-peer network is n squared, where n is the number of nodes in the network, contrasted with perhaps a more hierarchical network structure in which the value is n, where n is just the number of nodes. So a peer-to-peer network is like evolutionarily superior to a hierarchical network if they're going, toe-to-toe. So Uber and Lyft, which are somewhere between n and n squared, have been running circles around taxis under all of these different, markets all over the place. And you can kind of understand it in that continuum of, hierarchical to peer-to-peer. Now, another academic named David Reed comes along and he says, there's actually another more evolved network structure called group forming networks. He has the law of group forming networks and has a bunch of academic research around this. And basically, the theory there is that when you have a peer-to-peer network in which it is easy and potentially people are even incentivized to create groups, easily join groups, easily disassociate from groups, the value of that group forming network is 2 to the nth power, which is way, 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 way higher than n squared. That partially explains the dominance of Facebook, because Facebook is itself a group forming network. Now, their model is sure, let people organize and do various things and share stuff narcissistically about themselves, and then grab their data and sell it to advertisers. So that's their model.
Yep.
Look, it's gotten them to hundreds of billions of dollars. We don't like that model, but like, let's be real. There's people there, and there's something truly powerful about a group forming network. Like, and I want to just make the point that there are plenty of so-called decentralization advocates right now who may give us, take pause or give us flack for, oh, you're on Facebook as opposed to on our like peer-to-peer network technology, blah, blah, blah. It needs to be said that for us to move a network from Facebook, if we even had the power to do so, to a peer-to-peer network, it's actually a step backwards in terms of network structure. We're forfeiting a lot of that easy peer-to-peer connectivity, which for now, Facebook is doing the best job of that. Now, here is why in the most recent version of our mobile app, we've finally introduced social networking features, profiles, chat, create a guild, group. And it's because we want to start putting into our mobile app the types of things that have people use Facebook. We want people off of Facebook. It's not going to be by lecturing them about decentralization. It's going to be by providing tools that fit the types of things that they have found useful day to day in providing rides. So it'll be a gradual process of sort of getting
faster,
our network
better,
off
cheaper,
of that.
and more fun.
Yes. And not selling your data to advertisers.
Yeah, totally. So some of what you just talked about there about how like group forming networks are more powerful than peer-to-peer, are more powerful than hierarchical, which leads me back to another term you brought up a couple of times, anti-fragility. Can you speak a little about anti-fragility?
Yes, and if I remember correctly, the author named Nassim Taleb wrote a whole book about this as a concept, and I'm not going to do it the full amount of justice, but basically, networks that are anti-fragile grow under duress and don't fall apart. And there are arguably, there's plenty of decentralized networks or networks claiming to be decentralized, crypto networks that have under, for example, the substantial pressures of the bear market have just fallen apart, gone away, and like, they're not anti-fragile.
Right, clearly. And,
Arcade City, some of the difficulties of like running out of money, having, city cops raid your office, having a Philippine Transportation Regulatory Authority like threaten to send 4 different agencies against your drivers, like things that a more traditional or hierarchical structure that exists with like firmly within current regulatory structures, what they might interpret as existential threats, we can actually laugh off because we're like, ha ha ha, thank you for the press coverage that's going to 10x our driver base over the next month. And so we've seen that level of growth because the word gets out about what unique things that we're offering, and people don't even know that decentralized ride sharing can actually work in practice. It's a revelation to people that like, people think that Uber is so innovative, like, they're actually like kind of dinosaurs now. If you look at like the actual technological trends and what's becoming possible through peer-to-peer connectivity and the new, ways of connecting people together. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely touched on it a lot, I really like the idea of like community cooperatives and solidarity economies. I think this is that perfect blending thanks to technologies like blockchain, sort of your right-leaning market-based mentality and your left-leaning sort of community solidarity, human collaboration, and give a shit to produce for one's selves the abundance needed to live. And I really am trying to weave in over the course of months and years the conversation that can get my friends on the left to understand that their values that are generally applied in state government could actually be applied in decentralized voluntary systems where the governance is built in. It's not that we're avoiding governance, it's that it can go directly into the communities providing the goods and services rather than abstractly through a separate hierarchical body. And Arcade City seems like a really rad and pragmatic exploration of that, particularly because you guys aren't standing on principle and waiting for all of the software infrastructure to be there, you recognize the need to use tools at our disposal, including tools we would probably rather not be using too much, but they already have a network effect, so everybody's there, let's use it, let's be there. And also, really embracing the need for human interaction and human sort of input to step into roles that either can't currently be taken by software or honestly should probably never be taken by software. That some level of human interaction and decision making and collaboration is necessary for it, like, because otherwise what are we even doing? Like, eventually the robots just take over and start making widgets for themselves because, like, what's the point? So I like where you're going with this. So is Arcade City meant to specifically be ride sharing always? Is there sort of a future looking vision of where this goes?
Absolutely a future looking vision. Just to first touch on sort of the different sides, Arcade City, we've had sort of a unique set of learning experiences. When we launched in New Hampshire, our talking points were largely around what the free individual should be able to do. Mm-hmm. Any two consenting adults should be able to connect peer-to-peer, and it's no third party's business what they do. It's sort of the hardcore libertarian anarchist, get off my back, don't tread on me, we can connect peer-to-peer. And that was the founding animus of Arcade City. It remains, a core part of, Arcade City's principles to this day. What we saw in Austin was the power of community and a genuine respect for communities providing service. And one could argue it's community providing service in an environment in which top-down centralized power structures based on coercion fail. Uber and Lyft could not come to an agreement with the city. They left. Large corporate or governmental power structures based in some measure on coercion butt heads and screw over consumers. That was what we reacted to in New Hampshire initially in starting Arcade City. And I have come to strongly appreciate that Arcade City is able to balance these seemingly competitive ideals of the individual with the community. In political philosophy, or at least in the bastardized form that shows up in the, for example, American political process, you have the Republicans that are ostensibly on the side of individual liberty, and the liberal Democrats that are ostensibly on the side of the collective or the whole. I've been convinced that the spectrum is not actually a line, it's a circle.
Absolutely.
And that if you look at how these pieces connect, to my mind, the most interesting sort of potential political coalition in American politics is the libertarians and the progressives, who share a strong suspicion of government power. And I think if they were to come together under a context of voluntarism or non-coercion, non-violence, could find a lot of common ground and mostly would argue about methods. Mm-hmm. Well, fundamental to Arcade City and any true entrepreneurial endeavor is going to be the freedom to transact with us or not. And so if one envisions potentially many different cooperatives within Arcade City, and right now the focus is on ride sharing, but eventually there could be cooperatives focused on deliveries. We already have a substantial minority of our requests in Austin doing deliveries already. One can envision a cooperative focusing on emergency services, one potentially focusing on some sort of replacement for maybe peer-to-peer insurance models,
right?
Peer-to-peer, I mean, you name the service that people right now expect government to provide, but in large part because government is this repository of centralized power, it is subject to capture by large corporate influences that biases the result, and no one's happy with it. Like we need to subject all of that to entrepreneurial innovation.
Yeah.
And even though that oftentimes is associated with sort of right-wing talking points about deregulation, but like no, it's actually really, really, really good for progressives who care about a particular ideal, because here's your opportunity to prove that your ideal actually fucking matters and people care about it.
Absolutely.
And they have an environment to like create their own society that demonstrates the power of that and attract people based on peace, not coercion.
Right. And I find the important thing here, especially when you're speaking from that sort of right-leaning perspective of enterprise and voluntary association, that you don't fall into the trap, the assumption that's made that we want to dismantle the social safety net and everything that goes with it, whether we come up with a better model or not. And really it's like, at least for me, it's leave the social safety net as it is, even try to incrementally improve it on that level, because there's people there, they're working on that, they're trying really fucking hard to do that. So let's support that. But in the meantime, as we believe we can do this better voluntarily outside of government processes, we're putting the onus on ourselves to prove it by building it. It should not replace anything until it's capable of actually doing so in practice.
Yes, and I think those types of for benefit entrepreneurial efforts will evolve faster than others think. Just to give a shout out to, I'm wearing my Voice and Exit shirt, the folks behind Voice and Exit, this amazing festival of the future that occurs annually in Austin. The folks behind it are launching a nonprofit called Social Evolution. One of their big ideas is what they call a distributed income support cooperative, which is aiming to be a blockchain-based alternative to universal basic income that leverages blockchain and cryptocurrency incentives, encouraging sort of this voluntary, quote-unquote, redistribution of wealth. At least that's my interpretation of it, that will benefit the underserved and the people who need it. And if you really, truly empower and unleash cooperatives, a lot of the problems in society, I think, can be solved. Yes, absolutely. Let's not set the safety net on fire. Absolutely. We don't want to disadvantage anybody who is already disadvantaged. But like, there should be a whole lot more attention and effort given to outside of the system alternatives that don't need to go through appropriations processes, convincing bought-off politicians who are incentivized to hold to the status quo. Like incremental change is no longer the name of the game. We're talking about revolutionary change, and it's coming one way or the other. And like, yes, absolutely, we revolutionaries need to be building and innovating with an eye toward supporting the less fortunate and having them be winners in all of this.
Yeah. Wow. Amen. And the other thing about it not having to go through like legislative processes is that the legislative process is a sausage machine. You end up with like, say, the most beautiful, perfect idea in the world, but it's coming from a certain philosophy, a certain direction. You get it through that sausage machine, it's going to get whittled away and watered down and augmented and adjusted by everyone else's interests. And there's all the horse trading. By the time it's passed, it is not what you wanted. It's not what you thought of. And it's also not what the other people wanted. They only changed it because they didn't want you to get what you want. So no one got what they wanted. And then it's also, it's implemented on a level and in such a way that it usually doesn't actually accomplish its goal, but you don't know that until years and way more money than it should have taken down the line, which is what's so great about free enterprise and community-based initiatives is we, as free individuals, can try all sorts of shit. Like, we can throw 20,000 different attempts at the wall to see what sticks. And thanks to things like blockchain, we can build those solutions sort of modularly. All the pieces can be built individually and brought together individually as sort of a buffet of components that are required for your solution to the problem in your community. And as we develop those, we're going to have just so many options. We don't get that through government. We end up with ginormous, expensive, ineffective, inefficient. Not small, scrappy, experimental, community-based.
I think the main point that hopefully can detox people with continued attachments to the political sphere and the poisonous ideologies that go hand in hand with that mess is an emphasis on the dichotomy between voluntary choice and coercion. The incentives of the political system draw people into a lose-lose conflict. In one sense, it's win-lose, but really it's lose-lose between two political parties in a broken system with skewed incentives and the thumbs of billionaires on the scales all over the place, competing to get their hands on the apparatus of government coercion, funded through theft, sustained through warfare. I can't think of a moral war in my lifetime. They're based on lies, based on extracting resources on false premises from the Middle East. It's a bunch of bullshit. The correct answer needs to be to detox, disconnect from that entire system, and create a new system. One of my favorite quotes is from American inventor Bucky Fuller.
Good man.
Paraphrasing, but it's, do not try to fix a broken system. Instead, create a new one that replaces it.
That's right. That's my favorite.
So easy to create a new system, a new idea, create a website, popularize it. If it's a good idea, it'll go viral, build an audience. People with good ideas need to be talking with each other and sharing and finding some way to interoperate and help each other. It is unfortunate that the blockchain wave of late 2017 featured infrastructure and incentives that were not yet developed enough to truly incentivize synergy.
Right.
The incentive was for people to issue their own token and hold an ICO and convince as many gullible investors as possible to buy their shitcoin. And there was no real efforts at interoperability, which is why you had now, I mean, we've lost count at 20 plus quote unquote decentralized ride sharing startups, most of whom have disappeared. And like, where were they? And why did they not reach out to us who are actually leading on this and would love to work with new partners? Well, they want to get rich and do the same old thing. But the market is evolving.
It is.
And what I'm noticing now, and I've been involved in the crypto space since 2013, I'm noticing now a real shift toward synergy, toward interoperability, toward not duplicating efforts, toward people that are left standing after the bear market wrecked its carnage. The people that are in this for the right reasons and not to get rich can now see each other more clearly.
Yeah, buddy.
And now we know who we should be working with.
That's right. And if we made it through that bear market, we're here. We're probably here to stay. Either because we were well capitalized enough to weather the storm, or because this matters more than anything.
Yeah.
This is
or we're running on passion, not
right.
ICO money.
That's right. This is our cause. This is our community. There's nothing more important we could be working on. This is awesome, man. I really appreciate this. And I think it helps a lot to talk it out. The thing that goes back and forth to me all the time is how to blend the best of sort of right-leaning and left-leaning ideology. The idea that just like you with Arcade City utilize Facebook, because that's where we're at, we also are currently utilizing government for a lot of different critical services, food stands, road construction, etc. The standard things that the left leaning will sort of shit on the right, like the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists, on like how we're going to build roads. It's like, well, okay, we actually do have our work cut out for us to prove that the roads would be built.
Arcade City will be building some roads, by the way.
I believe.
Just throw that in there.
Totally believe it. But in the meantime, it behooves us to work in solidarity with people who give a shit of all political stripes to create these solutions, and to also appreciate where we're at with the systems and the tools at our disposal. Like, Arcade City may never go anywhere near regulation, I don't know. But a lot of us probably do need to work a little bit in the government space, in regulation. It's like, I totally support sort of the decentralists, as it were, going out and sort of building first and asking for forgiveness instead of permission. But that doesn't mean that we won't need to adjust, that we won't need to work with government to get them on our side, which is all the more reason not to be too radical or alienating with our speech. I appreciate when we speak strongly to how fucked up things are, because things are pretty fucked up, let's be real. But I also really believe in diplomacy, and I believe in communicating with people with the benefit of the doubt, that on an individual level they believe they're doing the right thing, they're trying to do the right
winners,
thing.
And to be, building bridges and communication with folks who don't see things the way that we do. And yes, our approach definitely is to build it now, ask forgiveness later, and but we can't wait for permission. No. There's just too much urgency.
Well, and that's true across a host of issues. We can't wait on climate change. We can't wait on criminal justice reform and foreign policy. We can't wait. While our governments are going to war with one another, I just can't help but feel like we need to become friends across nation states and cultural groups and political and religious groups and whatnot. We need to develop deep interdependent ties, both personally and economically, that make it really difficult and inconvenient for our governments to go to war on our behalf, as just like an example. And these decentralized systems do get us there. I'm really glad you mentioned Voice and Exit and Social Evolution. My last episode was with James Anderson from Social Evolution, a good friend of mine, and his buddy Joel Dussault, who's working on political leadership with this idea of how do we get people used to talking with one another, even if they don't agree. How do we get them engaging productively and not with this zero-sum game, I have to win and therefore you need to lose sort of mentality. The various ways that the concepts behind Arcade City can be applied to different things, and the various ways that the ideas of solidarity economies and mutual aid societies can be applied to various things, means we have the tools being built at this moment, and we've had, I think, the organizing principles for humans for ages now floating around in our zeitgeist to disintermediate entrenched power. The kinds that we currently find ourselves defending because we don't trust the future-looking visionary alternative. And so we just kind of shrug and say, yeah, I know it's not perfect, but we have to work with what we have, So there's that in the now with real practical ways to work towards what we're talking about. We can actually make pudding and have proof in it. Yeah. How can people follow you guys? How can people get involved with Arcade City?
Look for us in the news, hopefully. We're making a push now, starting with Vancouver, but we're beginning a real global expansion push now. But yes, definitely check out our website, arcade.city. We are on Twitter at Arcade City Hall. And we are coming soon to a neighborhood near you.
Awesome. Christopher David of Arcade City, thank you so much for joining me, man. Good
Damo,
times.
thank you.
All right, that about does it for another episode of What the Fork. I want to thank everybody for listening. New episodes air every other Wednesday, so we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for the next plain English conversation about cutting-edge ideas. To learn more about the podcast and keep the conversation going, visit me at www.whatthefork.show or troll me on Twitter at TechDrugsRock'n'Roll. Seriously, I'd love to know what you guys are thinking. I want to give a shout out to Spherion, who has graciously sponsored the production of this series. Check them out at spherion.com. That's SPHEREON.com. This show is sponsored and user supported, so if you like what you hear, you can help keep it going with a contribution at www.patreon.com/whatthefork. Or you can reach out at whattheforkshow@protonmail.com if you'd like to learn about becoming a sponsor. Thanks again, and until next time, fork this!